The music thumped loudly in the company's rented ballroom, glasses clinked, and laughter echoed as employees celebrated another successful year. But Daniel kept his distance from the crowd, leaning against the far wall with a glass of water in his hand. He wasn't here to party, he was here because it was expected. As the only black man in his department, he already felt enough eyes on him during office hours. Tonight, in this sea of swaying bodies and drunken coworkers, he felt even more like an outsider. His mind wasn't on the festivities anyway. It was on Zoe, his 5-year-old daughter, waiting at home with Mrs. Jenkins, the elderly babysitter from next door. Daniel checked his watch again. He wanted to leave, but the CEO hadn't left yet, and the unspoken rule was clear. No one leaves before Catherine Ward. Catherine was a force in the corporate world. Sharp, confident, and notoriously hard to impress. Tonight, though, she didn't look like the fearsome woman who dominated boardrooms. Slumped in a corner booth, her designer heels kicked off under the table, she looked fragile. Her glass of wine was empty, and her normally perfect hair fell in loose waves around her flushed face. Daniel hesitated as he watched her attempt to stand. She wobbled dangerously, clutching the edge of the table for balance. A few coworkers chuckled under their breath, whispering as Catherine fumbled for her phone. He sighed. He could ignore it and slip out quietly, but his conscience wouldn't let him. "Ms. Ward," he said gently, stepping forward, "do you need help getting home?" Her glassy eyes met his. "Driver, no. They take pictures," she slurred. "Don't want gossip." "Then let me take you," Daniel offered, holding out his hand. "I'll make sure you get home safe." She stared at him for a moment, as if trying to decide if he was trustworthy. Then, without a word, she dug into her purse, pulled out her car keys, and dropped them into his palm. "Don't talk about this to anyone," she mumbled. "You have my word." As Daniel helped her toward the exit, he felt the weight of curious eyes on them. The room was buzzing now, but he kept his focus on getting Catherine to her car. Once she was settled in the passenger seat of her sleek black sedan, she leaned her head back, eyes half closed. "You're different," she murmured. "Quiet. Careful. I like that." Daniel said nothing. He adjusted the rear-view mirror and pulled out of the lot, determined to get her home without incident. What he didn't know was that this single act of kindness would change his life forever. The city lights streaked past as Daniel drove Catherine's luxury sedan through the quiet streets. Inside the car, the air was heavy with the faint scent of her expensive perfume, mixed with the lingering aroma of wine. Catherine sat slumped in the passenger seat, her head tilted toward the window, her eyes half closed. Daniel kept his hands steady on the wheel, eyes focused on the road. His mind, however, was racing. This wasn't the kind of situation he ever imagined himself in, driving his boss, the CEO of the company, home after she'd had too much to drink. A glance at her face reminded him of just how human she looked in that moment. The sharp edges she wielded in the office, her commanding tone, her piercing stare, were all gone. In their place was a vulnerable woman, her guard down, trusting him without question. The car's GPS guided him toward the wealthier part of the city, where gated estates lined tree-shaded streets. Catherine's home wasn't just large, it was enormous. As the security gate opened with a code, she murmured. Daniel couldn't help but feel out of place. The driveway was longer than the street he lived on. He parked the car in front of the grand entrance and turned off the engine. For a moment, he considered leaving her there to rest. But he couldn't do that. She needed help getting inside. "Ms. Ward," he said, gently, reaching over to tap her shoulder. "We're here." Her eyes fluttered, open, unfocused. "You're kind," she mumbled. Daniel opened her door and helped her out. She leaned heavily on him as they walked up the marble steps. Inside, the house was silent except for the soft hum of central air. The foyer alone was larger than his entire apartment. As he guided her to the living room couch, Catherine murmured again, "You don't say much at work." "Why?" Daniel hesitated as he set her down and pulled a blanket over her. "Because I'm there to work, not talk." She gave a soft laugh, weak but sincere. "You're different, Daniel. Don't lose that." Her voice trailed off as she drifted into sleep. Daniel stood there for a moment, unsure what to make of her words. Then he scribbled a quick note on a pad he found on her coffee table. "Ms. Ward, you're safe. I drove you home and locked the door." Daniel, he set the note where she'd see it, then quietly left, pulling the door shut behind him. As he stepped back into the cool night air, Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that this night wasn't just a detour in his routine, it was the beginning of something he couldn't yet see. Catherine woke to sunlight streaming through the tall windows of her living room. Her head throbbed, her mouth felt dry, and her memories of the night before were foggy at best. She sat up slowly, realizing she was still in her dress from the party. A soft blanket was draped over her shoulders. Her eyes caught a folded piece of paper on the coffee table in front of her. The handwriting was neat, careful, almost formal. "Ms. Ward, you're safe. I drove you home and locked the door. Daniel." Daniel. The name tugged at her mind like a loose thread. Images from last night returned in fragments. Daniel's steady voice offering help, his strong hands guiding her to the car, his quiet presence on the drive home. Unlike everyone else at that party, he hadn't laughed at her, hadn't judged. Catherine frowned. Most employees would have used this situation as leverage or gossip fodder. But Daniel had been different. "Why?" she whispered to herself. Later that morning, Catherine sat at her desk, still thinking about him. She had built her company from the ground up, learned to expect ambition from her employees, and often selfishness too. People in her position couldn't afford to be naive. Yet Daniel hadn't taken advantage of her vulnerability. He hadn't even left a hint of judgment in that note. "Ms. Ward," her assistant said, stepping into the office, "your calendar's clear until 2 p.m. Is there anything you need?" "Yes," Catherine replied firmly. "Bring me Daniel Harris's personnel file. Now." Within minutes, the assistant returned with a slim folder. Catherine opened it, scanning the details. Daniel Harris, age 32, electrical engineer. Joined 3 years ago. Her eyes caught on one line, widower, one dependent. Zoe Harris, age 5, a single father. Catherine's chest tightened slightly. How had she not noticed him before? Quiet, reliable, no disciplinary issues. She had dozens of employees, but Daniel had never stood out. Not because he lacked talent, but because he never drew attention to himself. She flipped through his file and saw a note about his second job, part-time delivery driver, weekends. "He's killing himself to support his daughter," Catherine murmured. Something about that struck her deeply. She knew what it was to struggle, but she had chosen that path to build her empire. Daniel, though, seemed like someone just trying to survive. Her phone buzzed. It was a text from the head of HR. "Is there an issue with Harris? Should we flag him?" Catherine stared at the message for a long moment before replying, "No. Schedule a meeting for me with him this afternoon." She wasn't sure yet what she'd say, but one thing was clear. Daniel Harris wasn't going to stay invisible any longer. Daniel's morning had been like any other. He dropped Zoe off at kindergarten, grabbed a quick coffee, and arrived at work early to catch up on his projects. He liked to stay ahead, not because anyone noticed, but because he couldn't afford mistakes. For him, this job wasn't about ambition, it was survival. So, when his office phone rang just after noon and the receptionist said, "Mr. Harris, Ms. Ward would like to see you in her office," immediately his stomach tightened. He hung up slowly, questions racing in his mind. Did someone see him help her last night? Was she upset he'd been the one to drive her home? Was his job on the line? As he walked to her office, Daniel reminded himself to stay calm. He had nothing to be ashamed of. When he arrived, Catherine was seated behind her massive oak desk, her posture as sharp and commanding as ever. But her eyes, they were softer than he expected. "Daniel," she said, her voice cool, but measured. "Come in. Close the door." He did as instructed and stood awkwardly in front of her desk. "Ma'am, if this is about last night, I swear I didn't tell anyone. I just wanted to make sure you got home safe." "I know," she replied. Daniel blinked. "You do." Catherine leaned back in her chair, studying him like a puzzle she was trying to solve. "I read your personnel file this morning. You've been here 3 years. solid work record. No complaints. No requests for raises or promotions. Why is that? Daniel shifted uncomfortably. I'm just trying to do my job, ma'am. That's all. And your daughter? She asked, surprising him. Zoe, isn't it? Daniel stiffened. Yes, but how do you? It's in your file, Catherine said quickly. A widower raising a child on your own. That can't be easy. Daniel's face softened at the mention of Zoe. She's my world. Everything I do is for her. I don't mind the sacrifices. Catherine tilted her head. You didn't have to help me last night. You could have left me there, or worse, taken advantage of the situation. Why didn't you? Daniel looked her square in the eyes. Because my daughter is watching the kind of man I am, even when she isn't there. I won't give her a reason to be ashamed of me. The room fell silent. Catherine's throat tightened slightly at his words. She wasn't used to this kind of integrity, not in her world. Sit down, Daniel, she said finally. I have an offer for you. Daniel hesitated before sitting, his brow furrowed. He wasn't used to being in Catherine Ward's office. Few employees were. The air felt heavier here, the silence thicker. I don't want to waste your time, she began, folding her hands neatly on the desk. You've proven yourself to be more than just an employee. You're someone who acts with integrity when no one's watching. That's rare. Daniel shifted uncomfortably. Ma'am, I appreciate that, but I really was just doing what was right. Catherine nodded. Exactly. And that's why I'm offering you a promotion. Senior project manager. Double your salary, full benefits, and a flexible schedule to spend more time with Zoe. Daniel's eyes widened. What? Ma'am, I don't know what to say. Say, yes, Catherine replied with a faint smile. I need people like you in leadership. You've earned this, not because of last night, but because of who you are. For a long moment, Daniel didn't speak. He thought of Zoe, of how she'd been asking for ballet classes he couldn't afford, of the nights he came home exhausted from a second job. This offer could change everything. Finally, he nodded. Thank you, Ms. Ward. I won't let you down. I know you won't, she said softly. And Daniel, call me Catherine. From now on, we're colleagues. The weeks that followed felt like a dream. Daniel adapted quickly to his new role, earning the respect of his team with the same quiet strength that had caught Catherine's attention. He no longer had to take weekend delivery shifts, which meant more evenings spent with Zoe, helping with homework, cooking together, and reading bedtime stories. One Friday afternoon, Catherine called him into her office again. You're settling in well, she said, but there's something else I'd like to discuss. Daniel raised an eyebrow. Something else. Yes, she said, you've shown me what loyalty and integrity look like. I want to invest in people like you, not just in the company, but personally, I'd like to set up a trust fund for Zoe. Consider it a gesture of gratitude for saving me from a mistake that could have destroyed my reputation. Daniel's breath caught. Catherine, I can't accept that. You've already done so much, she held up a hand. You didn't ask for this. I'm offering because I can, and because I believe Zoe deserves every opportunity. For the first time in years, Daniel felt tears prick his eyes. I don't know how to thank you. You already have, she said, by reminding me there are still good people in this world. Months later, Catherine visited Daniel's home for the first time. Zoe, now in her little ballet outfit, ran to the door and stared up at the elegant woman in awe. Daddy, is this your boss? Zoe whispered. Catherine knelt and smiled. I was his boss, but now I think I'm your friend too. Zoe giggled and handed her a crayon drawing. It's us, Daddy, me, and you. Catherine's throat tightened as she took the paper. In the center was a bright sun and 3 figures holding hands. Daniel stood back, watching quietly. You didn't have to come all this way. I wanted to, Catherine said, looking up at him. The night you drove me home, I thought you were just helping me out. But now I realize you woke me up to who I was becoming, to what really matters. Daniel smiled softly. I guess we both woke up that night. Catherine returned his smile, then looked down at Zoe. So, Zoe, what should we do today? Zoe grinned. Can we bake cookies? Catherine laughed. I think that's a perfect idea. As the three of them headed to the kitchen, the house filled with warmth and laughter. And for the first time in a long time, Daniel felt like life wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about building something new with people who saw him for who he truly was.